I am delighted that as part of the school garden workshop this year, Wilma Holly, who is kind of famous in our area and the area around us, as our Florida Friendly Landscaping Specialist? Is that the appropriate title, Wilma?
Florida, yeah, that's close enough. Program.
And so Wilma is the person in our office. I kind of call her a little bit of an oracle, because when we don't know, our knee-jerk reaction is to ask Wilma, because usually she does. So, so I'm really excited. We're combining the Florida Friendly Landscaping Principles and edible gardening, and this is our first delivery of this workshop, and so we're really happy to be here with you today. And I am going to mute myself and let Wilma take it away. Otherwise, we'll be here till 7 o'clock because I talk.
We could make it last that long anyways. Okay, so we're talking about the Florida Friendly Landscape Principles, which is 9 of, and using them in your edible garden. And we've got some different parts of the program that you can apply to almost anything, and we're going to kind of go through it. Florida Friendly Landscaping, just for those of you that don't know, it's a very integrated approach to maintaining an attractive yard. You can have it colorful, it can be diverse, it can be friendly to wildlife. It's usually less work than a traditional landscape, but it kind of depends on how you plan it and how you maintain it, if it's less work or not. But if you're doing it correctly, following the principles, it will be less work. The whole program was created in the mid-1990s, and the main goals of it were to conserve water and protect water quality. And that still is the case, because conserving water and protecting water quality is extremely important. And all the other principles kind of tie together with doing that. Water quality, our water is one of our greatest natural resources. And the misuse of some of the fertilizers and pesticides and things like that can contribute to water pollution. And up to 60% of Florida's fresh water is used on landscape irrigation. So if it's abused or if something happens to it, then we can be in a lot of trouble with even drinking water. So we have to do the best we can to conserve it as much as possible. So some of the environmental concerns with the population growth, obviously, the more people here, the more water they're using, the increased pollution, there's decreased habitats, and those habitats are filtering the polluted runoff before it returns to the aquifer. So all of this tied in together. And notice this map right here, right now. This is Florida in the year 2005, and those red dots are developed land. So the next, you're going to see it in 2060, developed land. That's Florida in our future, and that puts in a huge, huge increase on our water supplies. So, and pollution and all that tied in together makes a huge difference. It's really dramatic when you see that in 2060. So, so the Florida Friendly Landscaping Principles are these 9. We're going to go through each one, and generally this can be a 2 or 3 hour program. So we kind of combine it down into 1 hour. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time on any of the slides, but we're just going to start out with it. But when people come to Florida, and a lot of us are not native, I'm not a native Floridian, but a lot of times when we're talking to a group of even 100 people, there'll only be a couple people in the whole group that are actually native Floridians. But we think it's going to be really nice, and we're going to be able to relax all day long, and then we start working in our yards, and it's a whole nother story. But when you use the Florida Friendly Principles in the correct way, it really can make gardening more relaxing and less work. So, so we're just going to go right into the first principle. Each principle is on one of these green backgrounds, so you'll know when I mean, it's numbered as well, but, and then a little bit of information, and it's on a different colored slide. But it's the cornerstone of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, because if you put the plant in the wrong place, then everything else is going to be mixed up. Your irrigation, your fertilizer, all that, if you're not putting it in the right place to begin with. So you need to select plants for a specific site, and that's good for regular landscaping or in a garden. because you're trying to use less water, less fertilizer, less pesticides, and obviously less maintenance. And a very thorough planning helps you plant the place the plants where you meet the needs of the plant and also your needs. And here on the right, this was a young landscape just planted, so there was a lot of room to intermix vegetable crops in between. Some of these ground cover types would keep growing and fill in, and the trees were going to get bigger. So for a couple of years, there was all this room, and why waste it? Why not put some vegetables in there and get to enjoy that as well? So the right plant, the right place, and right time, especially for vegetable gardens. There's certain vegetables you can plant certain times of the year, and this link down here, and Mindy or I will send all of you a copy of all these resources. I copied them all, put them all on a document, so we have that document separate, and we're going to send that link out to probably everybody that registered, because that's easier than trying to figure out who's here. Anyways, so you need to make sure plants have enough room. So in the case of watermelons here, there was empty space not being used yet. That was part of the garden where the trees hadn't grown yet, so there's full sun and they had the room. And it was in the time of the year that watermelon's going to do good, in the spring to early summer. But also this Sarasota County, Mindy and some of our co-workers did this special program on edible gardening, and we have actually 25 video series and blogs to go with each one. So really amazing series of videos with all that information. And then we are giving you links to these vegetable gardening guides and all that. And when I put the links together, I went down through the slides. So as you're looking at the links, it's going to be in the order that they're in the slides. And edibles to plant in January is going to be way different than the edibles you're going to be planting later in the year. I know you can't maybe read all of this, but that wasn't the point. The point was just to show you what some of the, we're in Central Florida here in Sarasota County, and you can see there's very little that you can plant this time of the year. And you can see how much you can plant in January, because we need the cooler weather for most of those plants that are listed there. So there's one of these plant charts for every single month of the year on the link that you'll be sent, so you can have that available. So before you plant, you really need to do a site analysis. You want to know what your pH is. You want to know if there's dry or wet areas, and this is for gardening or traditional landscaping. You want to know where the sun and the shade is. In the winter, the sun is more in the south, so you can plant things different than you're going to in the summer. So that's perfect for edible gardens. And in the north, in the summer, you're going to get a lot of sun on the north side. So a permanent landscape, you have to have plants in there that can take both situations. I know I burned some plants on the north side of my house in the summer, and then in the winter they re-perk up, and then in the summer they're like, oh no, not again. So it really makes quite a bit of difference. So that a situation like that would be perfect for sticking in some edible plants in between your other plants. You want to know where your hardscape is, fences, paths, raised beds, and make sure you're accommodating sun and shade on those kinds of things. You want to have easy water access, and that's for any kind of landscape, egress or accessibility, and then runoff and drainage. If you have an area that you know you can't get too easy, you're less apt to go out and take care of it. And or if water sits in there and there's not good drainage, so there's all those kinds of things that can affect that. You see in the top picture there's standing water. And Mindy, do you want to say something about this bottom picture?
Yeah, it's there's a fruit tree orchard, and it's very close to you know, other native plants, but also some invasive species. And so so if it's being maintained regularly, it's okay, but you can't leave it too long, otherwise the invasives will literally take over the orchard. So that's some of the stuff that you want to, that folks should evaluate.
Right, that's something you really need to be aware of, is the invasive plants, because they can take over in less than a whole season. Sometimes they just need a month or two. So you always have to be wary of what's around you as well. Okay, so soil and pH is really important to consider. A lot of your most of the Florida friendly plants are very versatile, but you have things like gardenias and azaleas, things like that, that need an acid soil. Blueberries need an acid soil. A lot of your vegetable plants want between 5.8 and 6.3, so that's a little bit on the acid side. A lot of your fruit trees are pretty flexible. So here's a link for getting a soil test. If you haven't, we do them here in our office for, I think, $5, or you can send it up to the University of Gainesville for $7, and you get a little bit more information there. And also we have a video about soil, and those will be in those links that you get sent. But very important to know the type of soil and how many amendments you might need to add, and whether your plants are going to grow well, or if you have to make certain amendments that way as well.
Yeah, and someone had mentioned that they're concerned they can't take notes fast enough. I will say that you and I are going to do this presentation again, and we do have other listings in Eventbrite. So people would be more than welcome to attend more than just this one. And then, like you said, we have all those links. And if you go back to the slide that you were just on, Wilma, soil and pH, that takes a while to learn. And that one of the videos that's linked there that we'll send you is like a 2-hour-long video, really giving really comprehensive information about understanding our Florida soil. We can't do it justice today amongst the other pieces. So it is good that we'll send you that link so you can explore it in more detail, because it has to do with how much the nutrients can be pulled up with that pH. So it's worth a watch. So we'll send that to you as well. Thank you, Wilma.
Yep, you're welcome. So choosing the right plant in the right place, you usually want to choose a diversity of plants, and that is actually true in a vegetable garden. In a vegetable garden, like, you wouldn't want to have just all cauliflower or all cabbage or just all tomatoes, because the thing with having a diversity of plants, if you get a disease or an insect problem in one plant, it could spread to all of them if it was a monoculture. If you have a diversity of plants, you might lose 1 or 2 plants of a type, but you're not going to lose your whole garden. And here you can see there's a mango tree with some flowers around it. Gaillardia. I actually ended up with an overabundance of Gaillardia there, but you can see some other, I think it was kale or something like that in the background. There was some other plants in there. And this was when before the plants got big and they were starting to grow. I was able to plant a lot of plants in there. Now I don't have hardly any room because everything's growing up. And so I have to resort to other areas of my yard. But that way you're going to get less diseases and pests on those kinds of plants if you have a little bit of a variety. And it also adds more interest and more edible options. And you're going to choose plants that are suitable to you, your space, and your ability. If you don't have the time to take care of plants, you might only want a couple of plants. You might want to mix them in your landscape. If you have a lot of time, you might want to mix up you might want to put up a big, long raised bed or something. It just depends on what you have and what area you have and things like that. School gardens, of course, you're way more limited on your space, and you're going to usually have a raised bed, but you still do want to do that diversity. You want to label the plants in seeded areas, especially if you're using a shared space, because that way somebody knows that there's something already planted there. You would hate to see 3 different groups come out and plant 3 different kinds of seeds in the same area and then have all these amazing plants start growing, and then you have to weed half of them out or thin them out because there's just too many types there. And saving seeds and sharing seeds is a good way to get some variety and some diversity as you're going along, especially in the school and community gardens. One big thing with it, the right plant, right place. Invasive plants are a huge issue, and there's some invasive plants, unfortunately, that are edible, but they're also harmful to the local ecosystem. And the IFAS assessment tells you what those plants are. And there's also the FLEPSI link. FLEPSI has now changed their name. It used to be Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, and they changed it to Florida FISC, Florida Invasive Species Council. But you still find it under FLEPSI. That link still works, and it's hard to, if you put in FISC, it still goes to FLEPSI. So
Do you think you'll have, can you pop that one up real quick? Because I think that one's a really good link for people to see how somebody like yourself reads the information that comes up when they pull it up.
Talking about this one?
Like the IFAS assessment or the FLEXI.
Assessment. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you?
Because I know when I first went to it, some of them I could read and some I needed interpretation.
Can you see my screen right now, or do I need to stop share and reshare?
I would reshare because right now I just see the beginning slide.
Okay.
But I think it's worth because invasives are so much an issue. I think it's worth the time and the share. Thank you.
So this is the IFAS assessment of invasive plants in natural areas. And when you first look at this, you're saying, well, copper plant's not invasive. No, copper plant isn't invasive, but you would click on each one of these plants. Like I'm going to click on rosary pea, and rosary pea is a prohibited plant. So you wouldn't even try to plant that because it's illegal. But say you're not sure about a plant, and you're like, what is kiwi? Is that invasive? I don't even know. It's a moderate risk, so they're going to reevaluate it in a couple of years. So if you really, really like kiwi and you plant it, it's something you want to keep track of and make sure that you're using the fruit, it's not escaping into another area, and then just keep track of this list and find out if it becomes invasive. And then if it becomes invasive, you wouldn't be allowed to have it in a school garden or a community garden. You could plant it in your own garden, but you still should be careful and mindful of it escaping. So that briefly, like here's copper plant. Copper plant is not a problem species. So that gives you 3 examples of it's prohibited, it's moderately invasive or moderate risk, and then not a problem species. So I'm going to go back to the screen now and reshare.
Thank you, Lana.
You're welcome. I think this is where we were, right? Yep. So on the IFAS assessment, this elephant ear, which a lot of people want to plant because it's wild taro, it's apparently quite edible and quite good, but it's a really horribly invasive species. Catalina guava is a invasive species. So you want to be wary of those things because you can't plant those in a community garden or school gardens. Because you don't want to contribute to the problem of harming the environment, and that's the main reason. And then there's other toxic plants that you need to be wary of. They might be edible at some point, but they can be toxic in other forms, like the chaya. That one is toxic if it's not cooked, so you really wouldn't want to put it in a school garden or anything like that where somebody might eat it, not knowing that they have to cook it first. And I'm not sure about velvet bean, but apparently that's toxic as well. And then chives, garlic, onion are not good for dogs. Rabbits love chives. Rabbits will eat them all day long. I don't know if it must not affect their breath.
I must not have bunnies in my backyard is all I gotta say. I got plenty of chives.
Yeah, they eat mine. I had to set them up on a chair. Okay, so you were going to talk about this one.
So when we talk about right plant in right place, some of the things that you do want to consider is how big is it going to get? So the top slide is, I want to say it's like a loofah, and the bottom slide is something in similar plant family. And so the top one was at a community garden where someone planted it all the way over here. Oh, you can't see my mouse, all the way to the left. In a corner, and let it go over the summer. And it was going, if we had let it go, it would have gone all the way to the end of that fence and probably beyond that. And it didn't bear. Meanwhile, in one of the other gardens, one of the members has something that can get out of hand in the pots. And then it's trained up that, it's like a fence attached to the posts. And so they're making really great use of growing plants underneath it, and they're keeping what they're growing kind of contained, and those plants were productive. So just kind of keep into consideration how big is it going to get. Same thing like and even within a species. So like banana, sometimes you can get dwarf banana trees. Tomatoes, indeterminate versus determinate. So just knowing some of that is important, because you don't want to overcrowd, because overcrowding is going to make the plants less happy. It's going to impact airflow, and you're going to have more disease issue. Not to mention you might crowd out your fellow gardeners.
Okay, so here's a couple of other examples. Sometimes you can use a ground cover where, like, you might grow grass in between beds or something like that. You could use a ground cover instead. And you want to group plants according to their needs. You don't want to plant a plant that doesn't need any water next to one that needs a lot of water. Here in the center picture, an area next to the fence and next to the sidewalk, they planted some pollinator plants so that you're helping attract pollinators to the garden. It wasn't a place where a vegetable could grow, some things like that. Here on the left, sorry, this was, froze in the winter. You got to be wary of the kind of microclimate habitat you're in. Fortunately, it didn't kill the tree. This picture way over here on the right shows the tree in the background. And as things have grown, there's been less and less space. So we've resorted to using some pots for some of the plants, a couple of tomato cages on the edge where there was a little more room there. So
did your mango come back, Wilma?
Yes, that's it in the background of this picture here on the right.
Okay.
Behind the tomato cage, it's kind of not a picture of the mango tree, so it's hard to see, but it's back there. So yeah, and right now it's actually huge. It needs pruning. So you need to know the cold and the heat tolerance of the plants. One good thing in the background here, where the mango tree froze, you can see all of the brassicas, kale, cabbage, collard, whatever they were. Those love cold weather, so they were just doing fantastic. They were growing like crazy, and none of the other plants were big enough to take over. So, so grouping plants according to their needs. Hydrozones. Here, the rosemary doesn't need a lot of water. Onions need a little bit more, but those were a little more mature, so they were probably doing okay in a little bit of way. Some plants can tolerate one or the other. So those are some differences. And then turf can be the right plant in some places. You got the ornamental sweet potato here, and then turf next to it. And here on the right, just if you're not maintaining something properly, you're just gonna have a mess and nobody's gonna even wanna use that area. So that whole area would have to be cleaned out. You could still use the turf in between the plots, but you would need to re-clean out the plots and start over with those plots, something like that. A small amount of turf can have a huge impact in an area, design, curb appeal of a landscape for a Florida-friendly landscape. But one of the reasons we talk about limiting turf is because they take a lot of maintenance, a lot of fertilizer, a lot of water, a lot of pesticides, and we're trying to eliminate some of that in our gardens. So limiting it to somewhat, but you still have some needs for it if you have children or pets or something like that. So, and Mindy, you were going to talk about these. I love this picture.
So and it probably looks a little different now. This was a picture of Bay Haven School and their food forest. And I remember one of the things you had mentioned to me was sometimes when you're designing a landscape, you don't always need to have squared off edges. So like I know for our community gardens, it makes maintenance easier having like a grid where things are kind of edged off. So if you're building a box, it's a rectangle. But if you're doing something where you're incorporating into the landscape, that, having some flow. But it's beautiful. Whether you're doing a food forest, or raised beds, there's a lot of options out there.
Oops.
And the picture on the left is your nasturtiums.
Yeah.
With some of your brassicas and pineapple and everything in the background. And great use of space. And because like you said, you were filling things in as some of those young plants were going to grow out, and then you didn't have to pull out long-lived shrubs. You got to eat vegetables while you were waiting.
Right.
And the picture on the right is from one of the community gardens, and there's like rosemary and like a Florida-friendly perennial type plant up in the front. And then they put some of their more edibles in the middle area, and then some of the taller plants in the back. So they just kind of arranged everything in a nice little way and made a little path within their own plot so they can get around easily. So they grouped things well. And then the picture on the top, I believe this is Fruitville Elementary. Gwatney out of McIntosh Middle and some of the teachers there partnered and had a grant and put in a mix of, you know, fruit trees, vegetables, and he tried to make sure he had like sensory type plants along the pathway. So even if some of the kids weren't actively using the garden, every time they go by, maybe they smell mint, maybe they get to touch a certain kind of a leaf texture. Just to, you know, add that interest for their day.
That's something with kids and gardens. I worked at an elementary school for a while, and we had some sensory plants, and they just loved that. Plants that they might normally not eat, when they got to try plants out in the garden, it was a whole experience to them. And things like that can be worked into the curriculum, like for measuring a plant, how big it grew, and they can do charts on who liked what the best and all those kinds of things. So it was really exciting to see some of that because they got really excited about it. So watering efficiently, that's pretty much one of the reasons the whole program was developed. But you want to water efficiently. It's very key to having a healthy landscape, a healthy garden, a healthy anything. Hand watering, micro irrigation, drip irrigation, bubblers. You're going to group plants with similar water needs together. And as we said earlier, 60% of a residential water bill can be attributed to irrigation systems. So if you're on city water that's metered, it's really, really important to use it more efficiently. On vegetables, you cannot use reclaimed water. And also we mentioned it later, but not rain barrel water on vegetables that you're eating. You can use the reclaimed water on flowers. You can use rainwater on flowers and all, but not where you're going to be eating something. And we talk about that a little bit later. And this is a very efficient head. It's like 40% more efficient than a regular head. It's called a multi-pulse sprinkler head or an MP rotor, which is a huge savings in water. So we do irrigation evaluations when we talk about some of that stuff and show people some of those kinds of things. So irrigating in the morning and even in your edible gardens, it's the best time to water because the winds are calmer, temperatures are cooler, there's better water pressure generally. Most of the water is going to evaporate. If you're doing it in the afternoon, it's actually illegal between 10 and 4. Probably not in your gardens, but it's still better not to water between 10 and 4 because you do get more evaporation. You don't need as much water in the cooler months. You want to check and maintain, and mulching beds is going to help. You need less water as well. So all those things make a huge difference. Less evaporation in the morning too. So effects of overwatering, this is usually more in lawns and whatnot, but it can happen in a vegetable garden. If you're overwatering, you can get dollarweed in there. When I go out to an irrigation evaluation and I see dollarweed, I know immediately either they have a problem with the head or they're overwatering. I'll even ask, I said, how often are you watering? And they say, oh, not too much. And I go, are you sure? And they'll say, oh, I'm only watering 3 times a week. Well, that's illegal, number 1, but number 2, you're watering too much. But anyway, so overwatering can encourage weed growth. It promotes a shallow root system because the roots don't have any reason to grow down into the ground because all the water's up there. If you don't water as much and you make the plant stronger, it's going to be healthier and not need as much water and withstand problems better. You get less oxygen to the roots, and that can cause stress if you're overwatering. And then it's going to in turn reduce the canopy coverage because the plant's stressed. So watching the weather, you don't want to water if it's going to rain if it just rained or it's going to rain. I would say in a vegetable garden, you can't go by the 48 hours because a lot of vegetables are going to need watering a little bit every day or a little bit every other day. So you have to be a little, with our forecast, you never know for sure, but excuse me, still watch the weather and kind of try to judge that a little bit. Having a rain gauge in your garden is a good way so you know exactly how much rain you got. Sometimes I'll think, oh, it didn't rain hardly any last night. And I go out and look in the rain gauge, and it actually rained. It actually rained like 1.5 inches or something. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm glad I have my rain gauge. Well, all automatic landscape irrigation systems require rain sensors by law, but in a community garden or a school garden, you're probably not going to have an automatic system, so you don't really have to worry about that. But it is something that's important for lawn irrigation. Fertilizing appropriately, this goes for school gardens, community gardens, landscapes, anything. You don't want to fertilize if you don't need it. Have a soil test done to know what kind of fertilizer you need, what your pH is, and then you can amend by adding organic matter and compost to help improve the soil, and sometimes that adds some nutrients, so you don't need as many nutrients. So knowing all that ahead of time with a soil test really makes a difference. And then you want to fertilize your crops as needed based on the crop, what the crop needs, and very, very important to follow your label calculations. And never use weed and feed. I don't, unless you have a great big huge lawn with no trees or anything else, then you could use a weed and feed, because otherwise it doesn't know that your trees, your bushes, your vegetables are not weeds, because that's only, it's going to kill anything that's not a grass. So weed and feeds, unfortunately, shouldn't have been invented. Anyways. So fertilizing appropriately, never fertilize within 10 feet of any water body, because it can wash into the water. Vegetables are exempt from the fertilizer ordinances. You still should follow the 50% or greater slow release nitrogen for the amount of nitrogen you're putting in there. Make sure you apply it properly and dispose of the bags and any, well, I don't know that you would be disposing of any fertilizer, but if you did, it needs to be appropriately done. And slow release fertilizers in the spring and iron for green up, those are more for lawns, but important if you were trying to green something up, or you slow release fertilizers are better even for vegetables. So Mindy, and I keep forgetting what you said this picture was here.
That was one of the fruit trees in the orchard. And so, yes, so you can see a little bit of the invasive plant coming in. And in this area, they only every great once in a while get supplemental water. They're dependent on rainwater. And they were being mulched, but I don't think they were being fertilized. So, but some of it I think was pH related as well.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. It looks like it probably needed a more acid soil, and it was very alkaline, I would guess, because most of our soils are alkaline here. And then it can't take in the nutrients properly, and generally you get that yellow look that happens to ixoras and gardenias and azaleas quite often if the pH isn't correct. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to get that checked and to add the appropriate sulfur or whatever you might need to help that up.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just wasting fertilizer and yeah, because it can't pull it up anyway.
Right, it can run off. And then over fertilizing when a plant doesn't need it can cause excessive growth, and then it might diminish fruiting. It can aggravate pest problems because the growth is so fast and succulent that the aphids, the caterpillars, anything, they're like, ooh, this is good, let's go here. And you can see on the top picture there where they just were going after that plant like crazy. You're going to need more water with over fertilizing, because you need to water it in more. You don't want to burn the plants. You can have runoff into the nearest body of water, and it can seep into the aquifer, and it's a waste of money. And here in the bottom picture, you can see the chives in the chair there. The rabbits were eating them, so I had to set them up so they couldn't reach it. Some broccoli plants in these upper portion of this picture, and those were in soil that had fertilizer in it, and it was slow release, so they got the fertilizer they needed throughout the season. This pot here never got the fertilizer. It had old soil, so it didn't have fertilizer added to it. And these are the same broccoli plants that were planted at the same time as those. So some fertilizer is necessary. So you need to pay attention to package directions and fertilize if you need it. But like here, the fertilizer was already in the soil, so I didn't need it, but I should have paid attention to these poor broccoli plants and give them a little bit of fertilizer. And this is just from, I forgot.
The creative collards that our agriculture agent had put on YouTube. So
yeah, and I put a link in the resource list that you will be getting to that video. It's an excellent video. I listened to part of it last night. I put it on fast speed and was going through it so I could find where you got this from. And anyways, so it'll tell you when you need to fertilize certain plants. So leafy greens only need fertilizing once when planting. Multiple harvest leafy greens, you want to fertilize twice when planting, and then a few weeks after the first harvest. Root crops 1 or 2 times, depending on how big they are and how long they're going to be before harvest. And then heads like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage 2 to 3 times when planting, about a month after transplanting, and then when it's starting to form a head. And I know you can't see all this real well, but that's all in that video. It's an excellent video about collards and all that, and some other information added in.
yeah, and I would say that's a good video to watch after the soil one, because we do grow a lot of brassicas in the school gardens and the community gardens because they do so well in Florida for the most part. And she just kind of walks you through understanding that whole plant family while also teaching about pH and fertilizer and all of that. So, so thank you for having the link, Wilma.
Yeah. So mulching. A lot of times people say they shouldn't add mulch to vegetable gardens, but it can, the bottom point here on this, I think, is probably one of the most important ones. It reduces soil-borne diseases by keeping the plants clean. If you don't have it mulched, and we get some of the downpours that we get, like the last couple of days in Northport, we had 2 inches, or 1 9/10 inches the other night. So all that rain hitting the soil really hard then pushes soil up onto the plants, and then there could be diseases in there, and it can just really increase your damage to your plants. And this way with the mulch, and it doesn't matter what kind of mulch you have here. I had a section there that had pine needles. Somebody gave me some pine needles, so I used one section with that, and then I had melaleuca mulch in another area. Gardens work really well with hay. You can see in this top picture, even Spanish moss. Some of the things for gardens, you don't always want as heavy of mulch as you do for your landscape plants. So some of those finer mulches, pine needles even maybe, but the hay works especially well in gardens. And then it's going to break down a little bit faster than regular mulch, and then you can till it into the soil before you do your next crop if you're not interplanting in amongst trees and shrubs like I did in my garden. None of this space is available right now. There's all trees and shrubs growing up all around, but it was fun then. But it also buffers the soil temperature, it inhibits weed germination and growth, but you don't want to mulch over seeds because then it's going to block and they're not going to get a chance to germinate and sprout. It protects plants from mechanical damage if you're too close with a weed a trimmer. Anyways, so not that you would be doing that in a garden, but if you're on the edge of a garden or something like that, that could happen. It really does make it much more aesthetically pleasing. So all those are really good reasons to use mulch. You want to replenish it as needed, use organic mulch, leaves, hay, straw, pine needles, and moss for mulch on tender vegetables, perfect. And don't want to use cypress mulch because it's not sustainable. Usually 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch, sometimes maybe a little bit less in vegetable gardens, but keep it away from the base of the plants and especially tree trunks and shrubs. But you don't even want it packed up against your vegetables because that can cause moisture problems too close to a base of a plant. Attracting wildlife, I love attracting wildlife. And one of the things that you're going to attract in your vegetable garden or for your school and community gardens is pollinators. You need pollinators to take care of your garden. So planting flowering plants to attract pollinators, insects, and birds creates a more productive vegetable garden. That's what the sign in the lower picture says. Urban areas are rapidly increasing worldwide, and developed areas can have an impact on the environment. They impact the local plant and animal communities, and all the, you know, you need pollinators for a lot of your vegetables. Not all of them. Some are self-pollinating, some don't need pollinating vegetables. And you know, your brassicas, a lot of those don't need pollinators, but unless you're trying to grow seeds, then you do need the pollinators. But having the edges around your garden with some wildflowers and things like that. We did put a wildflower link into the resource list. The Florida Wildflower Foundation, there's really a numerous number of plants that you can use to attract pollinators. So creating habitats, you need to limit the amount of lawn, because lawn does not create habitat except for mole crickets and chinch bugs and things like that. And you don't really want those. So the less habitat you have, they can go to somebody else's yard. Plant a variety of plant. That diversity is really important. Use plants in varying heights. You want to create layers. For birds, you know, birds usually are going to want to nest up higher. Some nest 6 feet off of the ground, but you need a lot that are up. And even some butterflies use the upper canopy for laying their eggs. Some lay on the ground. So having that diversity is very, very important for your pollinators and for birds and those kinds of things. And that helps you create shelter. And then your diverse areas are going to attract a wider variety of animals. And spiders are actually beneficial in gardens too. They trap some of the insects that you don't want. Of course, they attract some of the good ones too, but that's part of the cycle of life. You have to put up with both. So a variety of wildlife, birds, bees, bats, butterflies, beetles, frogs, toads, snakes. Some people don't want all of those, but they all have a value to a landscape and to a garden. If you're deathly afraid of snakes, you don't want to attract them. There's some things you can do to not attract them, but you want to, again, that layered and diverse palette is really, really important, and avoiding pesticides, especially around a garden, but any time you're trying to attract pollinaters. And this one in the middle, I forgot what the plant was, but it didn't get pollinated. So the fruit just fell off. It can't, if it doesn't get pollinated, it's not going to grow. So attracting those is really, really important. Managing landscape pests responsibly. In a situation like this where these insects are, and you're going to hear some from Carol about IPM and some of that, but these insects, they lay all their eggs. This one's one you don't want on your brassicas. It's a harlequin beetle, but they lay these eggs. And you could actually, if you're checking your plants once or twice a week, you're going to see those eggs. You could wipe those off, throw them away. If they've already hatched, they're still all close together. You can put those in a bucket of soapy water, anything like that. But it's not practical to strive for a completely insect-free or a weed-free or disease-free landscape. That's where integrated pest management comes in. You have a coordinated use of what you have, the information you have, and what available pest control methods. And some things you're just really not gonna, you have to learn to put up with them. A mango tree usually produces a whole bunch of mangoes. This squirrel was a little bit lazy. It would drop the mango and then it would go get another one instead of picking up the one that it had. In my yard, they seem to eat completely one before they start to get another one, but I don't know. I don't think they do that in every yard. So
I was going to say your squirrels seem to be more polite than some of the squirrels other people have.
I know. Not sure even if it's the squirrels eating them, but something likes to eat them anyways. So integrated pest management, you want to observe your plants regularly. Like I said, if you saw those eggs on that cabbage or cauliflower, whatever that was, you could get rid of them before they hatched and before they started creating a huge problem on your plants. So checking regularly is really, really important. There are physical, biological, and chemical treatments, but you always want to try the physical and biological first, which is starting with the least toxic method, and know your beneficial insects in your yard. Ladybug here laying eggs, those are going to hatch out, and then they're going to eat all the aphids on a plant like that. You would never have to deal with I know this on milkweed, this is really horrible to get these on there. And usually you can squish them off, but you want to make sure you're not also squishing ladybug eggs or ladybug larvae. So learn what your insects look like, learn what their eggs look like, and you can prevent a lot of the problems. In this picture on the left, this is a wasps parasitizing aphids. So that's another reason not to get rid of them. I started to cut all these tips off of that plant because then I would get rid of all the aphids, but then I saw the wasps and I said, well, they're gonna take care of the aphids for me. And a week later, every single aphid was gone. So, and ladybugs eat a lot of aphids. Assassin bugs eat a lot of insects. This was scale that had been parasitized. You can see some of the holes in some of the plants here in the middle picture, in some of the scale. So I didn't have to treat it. I didn't have to spray oil on it. Oil would suffocate the scale and you can get rid of them. But I have the parasitic wasps coming in and killing them, so I didn't have to treat. And a lot of people aren't aware of what the ladybug larva look like, and that's a larva of a ladybug, and it's also eating aphids. So you let them do the work for you. And here's spiders. They do a lot of good for your garden. Green lacewing are really super good to have in your garden. And of course, praying mantis, most people know how good they are at eating insects. Bunny proofing tactics, that's a little bit harder. In my yard, I use forks around the plants, but you can see I didn't have them close enough around this plant and they ate those anyways. And finally I gave up and let them have the plants. But when I put them far enough away, I really did keep them out of the plants. You can use chicken wire, you can use other methods, very simple materials, you can keep them out. There's certain plants that they don't like: asparagus, leeks, onions, potatoes, rhubarb, squash, tomatoes, basil, mint, oregano, parsley, tarragon, and some flowers like cleomes, geraniums, and vincas. And harvest it timely. When it's ready to harvest, pick it right away so other things aren't going to get in there and get it. Different things work. Geraniums, I had the geranium, that citronella geranium, and they were eating a plant near there, and I saw one plant wasn't getting eaten at all, and I realized the geranium was leaning over that other plant so they wouldn't go near it. So I picked leaves off of the geranium and put them over top of the other plants, and they stayed away from those too. So little things like that you learn as you go along, but you can interplant some of these plants in with some of your other plants, and they're going to leave them alone. It's a learning thing with rabbits, and there is a good gardening solutions article on rabbits, so that'll help you with that a little bit too. Cultural practices: maintain healthy plants as much as possible. Stress plants or full of weeds that can stress the plants, you want to kind of try to keep it a little bit cleaner than that. You have some cabbage and some other plants back there. Proper irrigation, fertilizer, correct installation and maintenance, crop rotation, all those things are important in a community and a school garden. Mindy, did you want to say anything about that photo?
I think you covered the bases on that one, but also too with weeds, sometimes they can harbor the diseases of the same plant family that would impact the crops that you want to grow.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
if a weed is the same, it does harbor some diseases, and sometimes weeds on the outside edge could be used as banker plants for insects, but that's another program to get into. And then physical methods, there's no harm in picking some caterpillars off by hand, disposing of them in soapy water, something like that. You know, using the yellow sticky paper to attract whiteflies so you can monitor how many you have, things like that. Remove the infested part of a plant. You can establish barriers to prevent pest access to some plants. Like this was cabbage caterpillars, the giant white, actually, which I wanted because it was a white butterfly. And I had already harvested my cabbage, so I actually let them stay on the plant, which I think you can, I guess that other picture is missing. But anyway, I let them stay on the plant so I could get some of the butterflies, but it just depends on the time of year. Earlier in the year, I certainly wouldn't have let them stay on there because I wanted the vegetable first, but afterwards, where it's already harvested and there's just some leaves left, I let them have it. So times of year, things like that, know what the pest is and and what it's eating and how to remove it without having to spray it, because spray would be your last thing. And most people know these lubbers, they get huge, and you don't want them, they'll completely demolish certain plants. So when they're first coming out of the ground, they have a tendency to bundle together. So I just knock those into some soapy water, and that it kills them instantly. It's not like it's a slow, painful death or anything like that. So that's the least toxic method. I didn't have to spray the yard. I didn't have anything seeping into the aquifer, just completely controlled that. I think I got all of them because I never had a problem with any adults later that year. The year before, I let a couple of adults stay, and that's why I had the problem that year. So, you know, you got to watch it. Here's where the caterpillars were on the plant that was already harvested, and I let them stay on. Chemical is the last resort. You want to choose the least harmful pesticides. And here for caterpillars, you would just use BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, and that would completely take care of caterpillars without harming anything else. But you don't want to use a shotgun approach and treat your whole yard. You want to just spot treat where the problem is. There would be no reason to spray everything around that plant, just that plant, if you didn't want them on there. It's extremely careful to follow the labels, instructions very, very carefully. The label is the law, and you'll hear, if you listen to any of our programs, that's one of the things we probably repeat over and over. The label is the law, because it's so important not to abuse the chemicals and use them wrong. Safety is of vital importance when you're handling toxic chemicals. To keep it
and for school gardens in particular, probably just default to not applying any chemical there.
Right.
I aren't licensed to do it anyway.
Just pick it off by hand and stuff. And so recycling yard waste, I need to really hurry here. Retain the nutrients in your landscape and garden. You save money on fertilizer, mulch, and waste disposal. Use for mulching and composting. You want to remove diseased materials to avoid reinfecting plants. And was there a reason? I'm not sure what this picture is.
It was just showing the reuse of oak leaves as a mulch.
Perfect,
So
yeah.
recycling the yard waste.
Oak leaves make an excellent mulch. If you don't like the looks of it, you can top dress it with a thin layer of another kind of mulch, and then you don't see it, but I think they're nice looking by themselves. Recycling it, putting it in compost bins, all those kinds of things, really, really excellent for compost. Fallen leaves, pine needles, mulch under trees and shrubs, but browns in the compost. And you want to create and maintain a compost pile with kitchen scraps and yard waste. Leave the grass clippings on the lawn or use them in your compost. When they go into nearby bodies of water, they can cause fish kills, things like that. They create algae blooms, which then depletes the oxygen out of the water, and then you get the dead fish. So that's really important. Reducing stormwater runoff, mostly in your gardens. You're not going to have to worry about stormwater runoff because you're not near an area where you have to worry about it. But we always want to caution people about chemicals or anything that might be in a walkway or driveways, patios, using mulch pathways instead of concrete when possible. There is porous concrete, but using stuff like that so the water can percolate into the ground. You want to observe the water flow in your planting area so you know where, if there's a lot of water flow, maybe that's not the best place to plant, and don't use runoff water to water your vegetables. So reducing stormwater runoff, create swales or terracing, and that's not so much something you're going to use in your garden. That's part of landscaping ethic all the way around. Or adding organic matter to your soil. And I heard Randy mention that earlier, how that helps hold more water in the soil. So that's a good way to help absorb some of that water. If you're using manure in your yards, or in your gardens, which is an excellent source of added nutrients, you have to make sure if you're storing any, you're storing it responsibly. That link is in the resource list. And collected rain barrel water, not for non-edibles, because it can hold contaminants from the roof. So we don't use that for edibles either. And then the last principle, the shortest one, protecting the waterfront. Very, very important. None of us live very far from the water in Florida. And 75% of Florida's population lives within 30 miles of the beach. Know your watershed. Where does your water go? Very, very important so that we're not adding to the problem. We're letting the water percolate in. On the waterfront, if you have, I don't know if any of the school gardens or some of the community gardens, if they're near any water, but you never want to plant vegetable gardens because they do need a little bit of fertilizer right next to the water. You want to plant wildflowers or something that doesn't need fertilizer right next to the water. You don't want grass clippings going into the water. So you want low maintenance plants that are going to absorb the nutrients. They're going to provide wildlife habitat. And that's what these low borders are going to be for birds and butterflies and things like that. Encourage beneficial insects in those kinds of areas. And it's going to help prevent erosion so you don't have things washing into the water. So those are all really important. A low maintenance buffer zone around your water helps all those things that we just mentioned, but it's good for fish and things in the water to have places to hide and things like that. So all these resources are going to be on those lists that I'm sending to you. This link at the top is for the edible gardening series with all those videos and blogs and everything. This book is excellent. If you're in Sarasota County, you're welcome to come to our office and pick up a hard copy, but you will also get the link for a soft copy, online copy. This edible landscape,
Both are free.
That's in there. All these, every single one of these links is in the thing. This Growables is an amazing website. Anything that grows and is edible, they have tons of information on that website. Really, really fantastic website. All these other links are probably in there as well.
In some of the videos that the agents have recorded that are harder to find, where our links may have died out, theirs are still working. So sometimes you can find UF agents videos on their website. Right.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. And these books are available, most of them through the UF IFAS bookstore. This one here as a new edition. The old edition is still available, actually at half price right now. I just saw that last night. This one you would have to get on Amazon, but these others are available. This one's online. These two are available through the bookstore. So in summary, FFL principles can be applied in school gardens, community gardens, home gardens, actually wherever you're gardening, you know, and whatever method you want to use. If you're using square foot, foodscaping, edible landscaping, permaculture, urban agriculture, you can use it in all of those kinds of situations. Follow the FFL principles, plant Florida-friendly plants, plant native if possible, or at least part native, plant edible plants and trees, and then conserve your water. Make sure you're following those restrictions and reduce your fertilizer use by using compost and mulch, and you're actually going to have a really nice garden that way. So I finished in an hour. I told you I could.
That was amazing, Wilma. I did not know that it could be done. I didn't mean to squeeze this in that tight. And thank you for that. And
I was getting worried there.
and you're right. I can say when I've been out at some of the community gardens, I can see a difference between the plots that are, you know, that are mulched and spaced properly and everything like that, right, compared to the ones that aren't. So. Someone asked if the book had been updated in the last couple of years. I don't know if she means the Florida Friendly.
The Florida Friendly, for some reason my chat is not coming up, but you know what, I can stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I can see it. The book has not been updated. They're working on it. They've been telling us for 3 years that they will have it soon. And since it's been 3 years now, I don't have it, because some of those things can change over time. Something can become invasive that didn't used to be. And if they have a mistake on a plant, there's one plant in there that says it's native and it's not. So double check those kinds of things.
So thank you very much, Wilma. And then the next one is going to be, Am I Bugging You? And that goes from 2 to 3. And that's with Carol Wyatt Evans, who we fondly call our bug lady. And we're going to talk about a mix of topics. and it's going to be a good time. Reach out if y'all have any questions. Otherwise, I will see you guys at 2 o'clock. And then after the Am I Bugging You, we have Dig In, and that one goes from 3:30 to 4:30. Enjoy your stretch. Have a fresh beverage, and I will see you again soon. Thank you so much.
See y'all. Thank you.